Thank you. What I want to do is give you just a brief overview of our Office for Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Partnership, our sort of philosophy and approach to dealing with pipeline, and examples from some of the programs very briefly. So as we think about this, I'm going to come up with these themes, these 7 terms that help describe our approach and how we think about the workforce. But I first want to begin with the concept of pipeline, because I actually don't like the term pipeline. I use it because everyone uses it and they understand what I'm talking about. But my problem with the term pipeline is if I go someplace and I park my car and I drive off, and there's some of this black stuff on the ground when I leave, I'll say I have a leaky pipe. And my issue here is that people are not oil or gas or something like that, and when you drive away, they're left behind, but rather people have resilience. Somebody asked a question about resilience, have a capacity to overcome, and that there's not one path to success. So I actually think about careers as taking a journey from one coast to the other coast. For me, from the West Coast to the East Coast, I'm not a lover of the West Coast. But in this journey, there's lots of ways you can go. You can take a stop along the way. You can restart. So it's not just one path. So with that in mind, these 7 things, this idea of continuity, and as we talk about these pipeline programs, this issue of all too often, students are exposed to one program with the thought that because you've been in this program for this 1 week or these 8 weeks, that is going to suffice for life. And the issue is that you need continuity in terms of supports across this spectrum. And so how do you turn the high school students over to the college or community college, the community college to bridge to the college student, the college to the dental or medical or nursing or graduate or whatever? How can we have continuity across programming? The second idea is this concept of consistency. And for me, it's all too often, I know many of the people in the room run various types of programs. We have programs that are funded for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. They come and they ask for the results of this evaluation and say, all right, now we're through with that, and they move to something else. And there's not a consistency and effort in understanding that these are age-old problems, and it's going to take a long time, as Peter Slavin put it, this marathon, that we are not in a sprint, but we are in a marathon. Concept of collaboration. When we talk about crossing academic levels, when we talk about community, when we talk about people at different, be they high school, college, medical, graduate, et cetera, or even medical schools, once you've seen one, you've just seen one. And we are so isolated in ourselves, we are not collaborating, and therefore it's hard for the students to make those same kinds of connections. And if we are running programs, I have no problem saying when a medical school runs a program for K-12 students, if you're not actively engaged with teachers and people involved in K-12, you actually don't know what you're doing. We are not experts in children or childhood education or K-12 education. And so how do we understand the expertise that comes from different kinds of training, backgrounds, understandings, so that we can work collaboratively for change? The idea of creativity, all too often we do programs, we don't have the evaluation, we don't have the outcomes, or we sort of walking down the street and say, I have a great idea, and we put things into place. It's not necessarily based on evidence or understanding or has a theoretical basis. We don't always articulate our goals. And oftentimes, what we're doing is replicating something that's been done someplace else, but we don't know why it worked in the other place, but we're going to replicate it anyway, and we don't know the elements in terms of replicating. And we don't get real creative in terms of understanding the problems that exist where you are. It comes back to part of this issue around context. Replication without understanding context, to me, is a doom for failure, because you actually don't know what you're replicating. Communication, that all too often we're talking to ourselves. If we think about the kinds of things that our funders want, that our institutions and organizations want for us to be recognized for our work and to be promoted, and they want publications. And all of that's well and good, and sharing the knowledge is wonderful, and sharing the evaluations is wonderful. But honestly and truthfully, the kids in the community are not reading those. So how do we start to communicate with broad constituencies. How do we talk to parents? How do we talk to teachers? How do we communicate with the students that we want in our programs? And we have to think very differently. For me, it's how do I think in an age where so much is online and the technology is used in a very different way. And so if your idea of advanced technology is sending an email, back up, because that's not what it's about. Also, if your idea of advanced technology, a few years ago, I sent my daughter a text message. This is about 3 years ago. And what she wrote back is, who knew you could figure it out? Clearly, you have to move beyond the text message, too. But there's another world that's out there. This consideration, and for me, consideration, it was mentioned a little bit earlier in terms of this intersectionality, where we try to put people in buckets, and all of us represent multiple dimensions of what diversity could be and actually is. And so how do we start to reflect it? How do we start to understand it? How do we make sure that when we're talking about inclusion, we're talking about really being inclusive and not just race, ethnicity, or gender? And this last one is commitment. And it's commitment from leadership. Leadership is what you saw from Peter Slavin, but it's also commitment across the board. It's got to be from top down and from bottom up if we're really going to move programs forward. So with this in mind, I think about what are some of the barriers, and you've heard about some of them today. I think about, for our children, the lack of I'm a pediatrician, so you're going to get a pediatrician's perspective. Lack of opportunities, lack of preparation, the curriculum that's being offered to them, the quality of the teachers, the quality of the education that they have, lack of awareness of career paths and opportunities. All too often, if you talk to young children, they think that if they're in the health sciences, that it means I'm a doctor or a nurse. They have no idea that there's other careers and career paths. And don't ask them what STEM is. It means nothing. I want you to go to a sixth grader and say, are you interested in going into STEM? Okay. Lack of resources. This is real concrete. This is not just a matter of being aware of opportunities and being adequately prepared. Do you have the resources to participate in the program? So I think about, particularly as I'm watching some of the funding that's coming down now, but saying, offer these educational programs to the high school students, but don't give them a salary or stipend. I will tell you that most of the students from Boston that are in our programs cannot afford to spend the summer and not get paid. They need money for themselves, but the money is also going to their families. So it's a critical issue to think about who we're really supporting, what kinds of relationships, mentors, network supports, and what are the practices within our institution, all as barriers to actually achieving this workforce diversity. So some quick samples of programming in this concepts of creating connections and continuum. Biomedical Science Careers Program is a 501c3, started out of my office more than 20 years ago now, that involves multiple sectors of the industry. It involves people from the academy, medical schools, dental schools, community colleges, universities. It involves all types of industry, from pharma to device industry, law firms, accounting firms, venture capitalists. Everybody's talking about this importance of diversity and coming together to say that we actually have to find ways to work together if we're going to support students in the process. And therefore, we've had over 11,000 students in our program, ranging from high school to college to graduate and beyond, with many of those students now holding faculty positions or leadership positions within organizations who are now coming back and mentoring and advising younger students. So this idea of connections where students can come in at multiple points, they can come in high school, come back in college, come back in graduate medical school across the board, but also this idea that they can be in the academy but find out about opportunities that exist in industry, so that there's not one direction. A good friend of mine, Woody Myers, talks about these young children as being pluripotential stem cells that can go in any direction. And how do we stop thinking of them as having one career path as a successful path, but rather paths that are aligned with the students' interests? New England Science Symposium. This one is involved with students who are involved in research, interested in research, presenting their research, brought to New England. You see here 5,000 attendees by 2014. We've had another 400 students that were just here, students and postdocs that were here this month presenting their research. One of the major things I'd say about this, for those of us who are in institutions and trying to advance workforce diversity, and people's thoughts that minorities don't do research, we do. People's thoughts that the research we're doing is not quality research. We do quality research. People's thoughts that there's no postdocs, there's nobody there to recruit. We just had over 60 postdocs here from across the country. So people are out there, but if you don't look for them, if you don't provide opportunities for them to come together and for people to see the quality of work that's being done, then they're allowed to sit in their corners and say there's nobody there. I think about the number of times I've been contacted by departments or scientists and others and say they're having trouble recruiting, and I'll say, well, what did you do? And then, I have to tell them that that poster that they put in the elevator is just not going to do it. So how do we actually recruit individuals? And the last of is in clerkship program that Alden mentioned, and we're having our celebration today because I think this is a wonderful example of understanding the pathway into academic medicine, at least for Harvard Medical School, and understanding that for our faculty, roughly 70%, 65 to 70%, actually did a residency or fellowship here. So that is a major way to enter Harvard Medical School as a faculty member. And so how do we bring more diversity to our residency programs? And what we did was take advantage of the exchange clerkships that have a reciprocity across all medical schools in terms of bringing individuals here to think about academic medicine as a career path, to think about our training programs, and then to apply. So an example is if we look at students as they're applying to the program, close to 50% have thought about applying to Harvard for a residency program. It's a skewed sample because they're kids and individuals who are willing to take a risk and come to Harvard. For some, it's a scary place to come. At the end of the program, 73% plan on applying to a Harvard residency training program. So being provided exposure to our institutions has made a difference. And as you can see, 52 have actually ended on faculty, some here today. So lessons learned. A lot of this is going to repeat what you've heard from some of the other speakers. We need a leadership that's committed. We need to be unambiguous about what we're talking about when it comes to diversity, with real definitions of what we're trying to accomplish and being consistent as we think about the structures we put in place, the roles, the rules, the policies, the practices, how we allocate our resources. We need to be consistent with that. Explicit goals and time frames. I remember a committee a few years ago that met and they invited me and they had decided that they wanted to increase the diversity of the faculty at Harvard Medical School. We have about 650 URM faculty here, and they wanted it to go up to about 2,000, and they were giving a 5-year time frame. Need I say more? Okay. What's the rationale and providing that rationale? Today you've heard about social justice, you've heard about equity, you've heard about innovation, you've heard about systems working better. This idea of including assessment and evaluation and evidence base and having data, we need to do better at understanding what we do, why we do it, when it works, when it doesn't work, and be willing to make the changes. But that means we need data, and we need to have the same kind of rigor when we're thinking about diversity in programming that we bring to everything else. And nobody would do anything in medicine without talking about evidence-based care. Why don't we bring this evidence to what we do in diversity? In terms of programs, again, this continuity articulation of programs internally and externally, multiple points of entry, exit, and re-entry. Somebody asked a question earlier about the environment changing. We have to be flexible. The environments change all the time, and if you're doing any programs with community, they change. Even as you're writing the grant, it's changing. And be ready for that. How do we cross these disciplinary boundaries and understand that these students can go in any direction and it's all good because they're going down a path that's right for them? How do we understand the systems in which they're involved? And think about it as career development. And we're helping people to develop a career that's right for them based on their potential and their interests and how they're motivated. And how do we track, monitor, and evaluate what we're doing so we can do a better job with scarce resources? Thank you.